JJ Widener here, Reality Check, and we are continuing our reading from The Monument to the End of Time, a 20-year-old book that's considered a classic. It was a limited print edition, and there's only 1,000 copies printed. We did it ourselves. We later got picked up by a major publisher, but I think this version is swifter and a faster read and less bogged down with historical details, which I love historical details and I love the book, but for the normal reader, it's quite a read. It's over 400 pages. It's only like 200. So today's chapter is Revelation, the Antichrist, and Chilaism. As you know, Chilaism is sort of like eschatology. It's the study of the end of the world. Not long after the Gospels were written, an author who identified himself as John, perhaps the same as the Apostle John, son of Zebedee, recorded a vision he had while imprisoned on the island of Patmos in the Aegean Sea. Eventually, John's apocalyptic vision became the official Orthodox version of the end of the world, mainly because of his identification with the beloved apostle of the Gospel of John. His revelation would become the revelation as the apostolic church, that's a tough word, apostolic church, closed ranks against the Gnostics and the pagan Romans. The early church had many different versions of the apocalypse, just as there were many different gospels. An entire literature of prophetic apocalypses had developed since the time of Ezekiel and Daniel. Many of these texts, such as the Dead Sea Scrolls, thought now to be the remnants of the temple library, have only surfaced in the 20th century. From these sources, we can see why the early church, struggling towards some sort of unity, chose John's vision as the authentic image of the end of the world. Jewish Christianity did not survive the destruction of the temple at Jerusalem in 70 CE. The Gospels, all written after this apocalyptic event, reflect Christianity that had lost its local messianic roots and became instead a universal mystery of religion. The three so-called synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, were all composed in response to the central question of who had authority within the movement. The answer of the Gospels is clear. Only the apostles and their appointed spiritual descendants could claim legitimate authority over the church. Early in the 2nd century, we can detect the beginnings of orthodoxy. As the apostolic Gospels spread, an organization developed that included deacons to look after the people. Now there were priests to perform the ceremonies, and bishops were needed to administer the authority of the apostles in their absence. The chain of command was very clear and simple. God had sent Christ, who had called the apostles. To them, he gave the responsibility for his church, and they in turn ordained the leaders of the individual Christian communities. However, the mystical aspects of Christianity had spread throughout the empire, blending with various other currents, such as the essentially pagan beliefs of Gnosticism. This created a vast Christian movement that was far from content with the simple apostolic interpretation of spiritual authority. The Gnostics in particular insisted on a direct experience of Christ that was unmediated by any priest or bishop. This was, of course, much more exclusive and difficult to obtain than the apostolic guarantee of instant salvation conferred by belief and obedience. Orthodox apostolic Christianity became a mass movement in the late 2nd century, while Gnostic groups dwindled into closed societies of adepts. Other salvationist religions, such as the Christian lookalike known as Mithraism, competed for adherence and imperial support. By 180 CE, when Irenaeus compiled his authoritative list of books in the New Testament canon with St. John's Revelation as its official apocalypse, Orthodox Christianity has solidified into powerful social and political force. For over a century, in the face of periodic persecution from various emperors, the Orthodox Church had gained in strength and influence. The extreme persecution of the early 4th century were a last-ditch attempt to halt the erosion of imperial and pagan authority caused by the growth of Christianity with its appeal to God's authority as administered by the apostolic bishops. The book of Revelation had the authority of the Apostle John behind it, as well as a distinctive Gnostic flavor. He was the beloved disciple who sat next to Christ at the Last Supper. In it, Christ speaks through John directly to the 7 churches of Asia, lecturing and scolding the Christians while warning them of a coming period of persecution. And then in a sudden shift of tone, Christ invites John to, quote, "Come up here and I will show you what must take place after this," unquote. John ascends to the throne of heaven and sees the seraphim mentioned by Ezekiel. He also sees a lamb who breaks open the 7 seals and reveals the future. This long, complex, and bizarre vision seems intended to encourage the faithful in the resistance to the pressures of emperor worship. Some of the churches, which Christ addresses through John, were advocating a policy of compromise with the Roman authorities. The Emperor Nero was the beast in Revelation. He was a vision of the demiurge on earth. He was Satan, emperor, and false god, all rolled into one. Many of these Christians were willing to compromise with the mad Caesar. This had to be stopped. According to John, because the final showdown between God and Satan was imminent, Satan, in the form of the Roman state, will increase its persecution of believers, but they must stand fast, even in the face of death. They are sealed from any spiritual harm, though their bodies may suffer. They will, in any case, be vindicated when Christ returns to destroy the wicked. All of Rome is seen in Revelation as the great beast, the whore of Babylon, and its emperor as the Antichrist. When Christ returns as King of Kings, he will lead the heavenly host in battle against the beast and the king of the earth. In John's vision, Christ wins and then rules for a millennium. This is the only place in the New Testament where a 1,000-year reign of Christ is mentioned. After this, Satan reemerges from his pit and challenges Christ. God sends fire from the sky, and Satan, the beast, and the false prophet all end up roasting in the lake of fire. This ushers in the final day of judgment. After punishing the wicked and resurrecting the saints, God decides to dwell among men and therefore creates a new heaven and a new earth, along with a new Jerusalem. There is no visible temple in this new Jerusalem and no need of the sun or the moon. The presence of God in Christ provides so much light that is never dark. From the middle of the new city flows the waters of the river of life. On its bank stands the tree of life, which produces fruit continually. The elect will see the face of God and therefore be immortal, reigning forever and forever. Cleanthes, a Gnostic poet of the early 2nd century, knew of John's revelation and wove it into his own work, now long gone except for disapproving quotes from Origen on Chilaism. Cleanthes gained a large following by teaching that the millennium foretold in John's revelation would be a physical earthly paradise where the senses would be subject to delights and pleasures. There would be a space of 1,000 years for celebrating nuptial festivals. Origen, a 2nd century Christian apologist, was the first important Christian to discredit the common notion of a physical paradise as the kingdom of heaven. He substituted a spiritual and individual kingdom for the literal and collective apocalypse described by John's revelation. Origen explained that the heavenly feasting prophesied in Revelation and that so delighted the Chilaeus should be understood as spiritual nourishment from Christ. But the idea of a physical New Jerusalem of gold and precious stones proved hard to displace. Chilaism would continue to crop up around the edges of orthodoxy for more than 1,000 years. As we shall see, the idea of a physical transformation that accompanies the end of the world would become the inner secret of Western occultism. In alchemy, the process of transformation would be studied in isolation from its Gnostic and Chilaist origins. The anonymous magician of Thebes, buried with his copy of the Emerald Tablet, was an early 2nd century contemporary of the pseudo-Cleopatra and Clenthius. His wisdom papyrus would provide a much needed practical counterpoint to the late classical alchemical theorists such as Olympiodorus and Stephanopoulos of Alexandria. The 7th century Stephanopoulos, who dedicated his 9 lessons in chemia to the Eastern Emperor Heraclitus, represents the dividing line between the classical period, that of alchemy's emergence, and the new world of Christian orthodoxy. While Christianized Greek Hermeticism continued in the East as a spiritual indulgence for mystical and scholarly monks, the tradition in the West was ruthlessly persecuted. The church saw it as irrevocably tainted with pagan ideals. Western Christianity, and even some of the alchemists, believed that investigation into the hidden works of nature was sacrilegious. It smacked of the forbidden fruit of the tree of knowledge in the Garden of Eden. And it was, after all, part of the illicit arts given to humanity by the fallen angels. Acquiring knowledge, like eating the fruit, allowed man to become more like God. If we are to believe the Emerald Tablet, then alchemy contained the very secret of independent creation. From this, it is not hard to see how the later alchemists, from Olympiodorus in the 5th century on down, were observed with symbols of the tree of knowledge and the serpent, its guardian and initiator. Part of this is the influence of the Gnostic sects, such as the Ophites, who worshiped the snake in the garden as the author of wisdom, given to man in order to free him from the domination of the demiurge, Yaldabaoth. Over time, these symbols would become the most cherished of all in the alchemical tradition. However, this perspective certainly did not help them survive the onslaught of orthodoxy in the 4th and 5th centuries. In the late 4th century, the Emperor Theodosius ordered the pagan temples destroyed. The Serapeum at Alexandria and its library of ancient texts were burned. Hypatia, the last great woman alchemist philosopher, was able to save some of the library, and for a while studies continued. Hypatia's murder in 415 CE put an end to all pagan learning in Egypt. The remnants of the scholars fled to Athens, where they were finally destroyed by Justinian in 529 CE. As the darkness fell over Europe and the West, a brief Hermetic renaissance flowered in Constantinople. Some of these compilations from the pagan Greeks would eventually make their way to France, purchased by the enigmatic late medieval King Francis I. Centuries later, a young student of the art, Fulcanelli, would find these manuscripts extremely valuable. From them, we can speculate. He found some of the same symbolic keys that we have just elucidated. However, without the conquering Arabs, most of the secrets would soon have died in the persecutions of the 5th and 6th centuries. The fragmentation of the ancient knowledge led to many dead ends and vain quests. The timing of the transformation became more important than the transformation of time. And so we see that Revelation, the book of Revelation, is preserved as the last book of the Bible, just as the Henday chapter is preserved as the last book of Mystery of the Cathedrals. And I don't think that's any accident. And the events described in Revelation, I'm going to read some of that for you here. So this is Revelation part 6. the first seal, the white horse. Then I watched as the Lamb opened up one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say in a thunderous voice, "Come." So I looked and I saw a white horse, and its rider held a bow, and he was given a crown, and he rode out to overcome and conquer. So I think that's talking about Kalki. Kalki is the male counterpart to Kali, and he has a white horse, and he comes to warn us that this thing is coming. And that's why he's the first seal. The second seal, war. And when the Lamb opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." Then another horse went forth. It was bright red, and its rider was granted permission to take away peace from the earth and to make men slay one another. And he was given a great sword. Okay, the third seal is famine. And when the Lamb opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." Then I looked and I saw a black horse, and its rider held in his hand a pair of scales. And I heard what sounded like a voice from among the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." The fourth seal is death. And when the Lamb opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come." Then I looked and I saw a pale green horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed close behind. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, by famine, by plague, and by the beasts of the earth. The fifth, okay, I'm not going to go too much further, but you get the idea. I'm going to do the sixth one, the sixth seal, terror. And when I saw the Lamb open the sixth seal, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black like sackcloth of goat hair, and the whole moon turned red, and the stars of the sky fell to earth like unripe figs dropping from a tree shaken by a great wind. The sky receded like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved from its place. Then the kings of the earth, the nobles, the commanders, the rich, the mighty, and every slave and free man hid in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and the rocks, "Fall on us and hide us from the face of the one seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, from the great day of their wrath, for the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand it?" All right. This. So Revelation was probably written about 300 years or so before Jesus's time. It looks like it was written by Egyptian prophetess, and then John or whoever added in a lot of the Christian things to it, but it was a text that had been around for a while. And it's an incredibly jarring read. And the thing is that Randall Carlson recently did a series on the Great Fires that struck North America between 1810 and 1910. And I'm going to have him on the show here soon to discuss his findings. And what he discovers, is that frequently these giant fires happen during meteor showers or right near meteor showers, like soon after. And meteor showers is the Earth going through the tail of an ancient comet that had gone by and left all of its particles behind. And Randall Carlson points out that, I think it was in 1994, they did a close flyby of a comet. And they did a sample. They did mineral samples and all sorts of different analyses. And they discovered that comets have methane in them and also ethane, both highly flammable gases. And so, like the October 8th, 1871 fire was right during where we passed the tail of a comet, and all the meteors look like they're coming out of the constellation of Draco. Draco, of course, the dragon. So, so you can imagine if these little meteor particles actually do have flammable material in them, and they're coming down to the earth and getting to a place where maybe there's, something that sparks that, and that causes the giant fires. Now we're dealing with, and they always happen around the time of a meteor shower, which is what his research has shown. And then we know that what they're describing in Revelation has also been described by the people who experience these giant fires, in which particles were coming out of the sky and in the atmosphere literally caught fire, and not from the ground up, but from the air down, is how everyone described. And these fires are huge. The Chicago fire of October 8th, 1871 was not just in Chicago. It was the entire Lake Michigan area, all the way up. Hundreds of people died, and it was just like one of the worst fires in United States history. And if you start going through big fires, and when we have meteor storms, you see there is an immediate correlation. So this might be the reason why, like we have maps from 1500 and 1600 showing many rivers in the Sahara Desert that aren't there now. It's as if there was an event that caused the Sahara Desert to become the Sahara Desert, and this event maybe happened like quickly, and it's just been lost to history. We don't know. But anyway, so the book of Revelation is both a description of the catastrophe in the past and a description of the catastrophe in the future, which is exactly what the Cross of Henday is. It's a monument to the catastrophe that destroyed us almost 13,000 years ago, almost destroyed us 13,000 years ago. And it's a description of what's going to happen in the next catastrophe. And we're going to get into all of that. We're just kind of getting you ready so you understand the every spiritual tradition on earth, including Christianity and Islam, have this end of the world thing about it. And that's really what this book is. This book is a book on eschatology. It's probably one of the most important books ever written on eschatology or Chilaism. And it's $450 on Amazon. So I'm reading it to you now. Anyway, that's it. That's all I got to say. I'm Jay Widener. Thanks for watching, and I will see you later. Hit like and subscribe and tell your friends, and hopefully no one's too offended by anything that's going on. All right, thanks.